Today, we're diving into a true automotive paradox, a legend that, if you just look at the physics on paper, shouldn't even exist, let alone dominate.
I mean, seriously, the engine is in completely the wrong place. Any engineer will tell you that. So how did Porsche get this so incredibly right for so long, when basic science says it should be a total disaster? Well, let's get into it.
First off, you've got to understand that this whole idea of a rear-engine car being a bad thing, well, it's not new. Not at all. It's a deep-seated belief in the car world.
The thinking kind of makes sense, right? You stick this huge, heavy chunk of metal behind the rear wheels. So when you turn, that weight just wants to keep going straight, right? It's like a pendulum that's trying to swing the back of the car around and, send you spinning into a ditch.
And get this quote is from all the way back in 1949. That just shows you how long people have been skeptical. For decades, the general agreement was crystal clear. Putting the engine in the back was basically just asking for trouble.
And that old belief? Well, it found its ultimate poster child back in the 1960s with a car called the Chevrolet Corvair. And man, this story happened fast. GM launches the Corvair in 1960, but just 5 years later, a young guy named Ralph Nader writes a book that just absolutely destroys its reputation. And even though Chevy rushed out an updated, much safer version that very same year, it was too late. The damage was done. They stopped making it just a few years after that.
This was the line that killed it. A one-car accident. It was so catchy, so powerful, that it pretty much convicted the Corvair, and basically all rear-engine cars along with it in the court of public opinion.
So here's the big question. Everyone pointed their finger at the engine's location. But was that really the thing causing the problem? Nope. Turns out it had almost nothing to do with the engine at all. The real problem, the smoking gun, was the suspension. The Corvair used this really basic, cheap design called a swing axle, and it had this awful habit of making the outside rear wheel just tuck under itself when you were cornering hard. And when that happened, you'd have a sudden total loss of grip. Game over. But see, the swing axle wasn't just a Corvair thing. It was a common, flawed design from that time, and plenty of front-engine cars used it too. Look at the Mercedes 190 SL or the Triumph Herald. So the problem wasn't where the engine was, it was the cheap suspension they attached to it.
Okay, so this brings us back to the physics of it all. That whole Corvair mess really burned the pendulum idea into people's brains, but that's just the completely wrong way to think about how a car works.
The real concept we need to talk about is something called moment of inertia. It's just a fancy way of saying that the more spread out an object's weight is, the more it fights against being spun. Think of a figure skater. When they pull their arms in tight, they spin super fast. When they stretch them out, they slow right down. Same idea. So thinking of it as a pendulum on a string is wrong because there's no structure. A car isn't a limp weight on a string, it's one solid piece. A way better way to picture it is like a sledgehammer. Imagine trying to quickly twist a sledgehammer by holding the very end of the handle. It's incredibly hard to do, right? That long, stiff handle gives it stability. Well, the car's chassis is that long, rigid handle. It provides a ton of rotational stability. So this is where the story gets really interesting. While almost everyone else saw a fatal design flaw, Porsche, they saw a huge opportunity. They didn't run away from the design, they decided to master it. They turned that so-called weakness into a massive strength. Instead of just giving up and moving the engine like everyone else, Porsche buckled down and spent more than 60 years. Think about that. 6 decades, perfecting and taming the physics of the rear engine layout. And they did it with a two-part strategy. First, they used a boxer engine, which is flat with the pistons moving sideways. This let them mount the engine super low, which gives the car an incredibly stable center of gravity. And second, they started to actively use all that weight in the back as a strategic weapon. And that's how the flaw became a superpower. When you floor it, all that weight instantly smashes the rear tires into the road, giving it insane grip off the line, something front-engine cars can only dream about. And then, when you stomp on the brakes, most cars nosedive, right? Lifting the rear and losing grip. But the 911's heavy rear end keeps it almost perfectly level, keeping all 4 tires biting the pavement, which makes it one of the absolute best braking cars on the planet. Okay, so the theory is solid. The engineering is just brilliant, but what's the ultimate proof? Where's the evidence that Porsche actually pulled off the impossible? You just have to look at the racetrack. We're talking about the legendary 24 Hours of Le Mans, one of the toughest, most grueling races in the world.
And the 911 has consistently, for decades, just wiped the floor with the competition in its class. If the design was really that bad, believe me, it would have been exposed there a long, long time ago.
Now, it's not perfect. It's not a flawless design. When you're accelerating really hard, the front end can get a little light. It definitely has its own unique way of handling that demands respect. But those aren't seen as flaws anymore. They're just quirks. They're part of the car's legendary character, something that skilled drivers have learned to understand and even use to their advantage.
You know, the story of the 911 is just this amazing reminder that conventional wisdom isn't always right. By refusing to listen to the naysayers and instead doubling down on a supposed limitation, Porsche created an absolute icon. It really makes you wonder, what other widely accepted truth out there is just waiting for someone to come along and prove it wrong?